The small town of Millbrook was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Houses lined the main street like old friends, and the biggest excitement usually came from Mrs. Peterson's cat getting stuck in the maple tree again. But beneath this peaceful surface, power played its games just like anywhere else. 20-2-year-old Lucy worked alongside her mother in their little tailoring shop on Main Street. Every morning, she would unlock the blue wooden door and flip the hand-painted sign that read Mitchell's Alterations. The shop smelled of lavender and old fabric, and sunlight streamed through windows that needed cleaning more often than they got it. Lucy had gentle hands that could mend any tear, and eyes that noticed every crooked seam. But more than that, she had something rare in Millbrook. She spoke her mind. While other young women in town learned to nod and smile at whatever the men decided, Lucy asked questions. She wondered why things had to be a certain way just because they always had been. Her mother, Helen, worried about this quality in her daughter. "Lucy, honey," she would say while pinning a hem, "sometimes it's better to bend a little. Trees that don't bend break in the storm." But Lucy would just smile and keep working, humming songs she made up in her head. The most powerful man in Millbrook wasn't the mayor or the banker. It was Reverend William Carter, a tall man with silver hair, and a voice that could make people feel guilty for thoughts they hadn't even had yet. He had been the pastor at Millbrook Community Church for 15 years, and in that time he had built himself quite a kingdom. People came to him not just for spiritual guidance, but for advice on everything from business deals to family disputes. He had opinions on who should marry whom, which families deserved help during hard times, and even which stores people should support. Most folks went along with whatever he suggested because, well, it was easier than causing trouble. The Reverend had noticed Lucy over the years. She was pretty, of course, but more interesting to him was her independence. Here was a young woman who didn't automatically defer to his authority. She listened politely during his Sunday sermons, but never seemed to hang on his every word like others did. This both intrigued and annoyed him. Lucy's family attended church every Sunday, sitting in the third pew on the left side. Helen always brought a small fan because the church got stuffy, and Lucy always brought a mint because the services ran long. They were quiet members of the congregation, never causing any fuss, never asking for special attention, but the Reverend had plans brewing in his mind. His son Thomas was coming home from seminary school, and William Carter was already thinking about suitable wives for the young man. Thomas was 25, smart enough, and destined to follow in his father's footsteps. He would need a wife. Who could be molded into the perfect pastor's wife? When Thomas finally returned to Millbrook on a crisp October day, the whole town turned out to welcome him. He looked impressive stepping off the afternoon train, tall like his father, with dark hair and the kind of smile that practiced itself in mirrors. He wore a fine black coat and carried himself like someone who expected attention, that very first. Sunday back, Thomas's eyes found Lucy in her usual spot. She wore a simple blue dress that her mother had sewn, and her brown hair was pinned back neatly. She wasn't trying to catch anyone's attention, but Thomas was caught anyway. Not by love, but by the challenge she represented after the service. As people gathered in the churchyard sharing news and gossip, Thomas made his way over to where Lucy stood with her mother. "Miss Lucy Mitchell," he said, taking her hand before she could pull it back. "I remember you from before I left for school. You've grown into quite a lovely young lady." Lucy felt uncomfortable with how long he held her hand and how his eyes seemed to look right through her clothes. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," she said politely, finally pulling her hand free. "How was your time at seminary?" "Enlightening," he said, with that practiced smile. "I learned so much about God's plan for families, for marriages, for the proper order of things." The way he said it made Lucy's skin crawl, though she couldn't exactly say why. Helen jumped into the conversation, nervous about any tension. "That's wonderful, Thomas. Your father must be so proud. Lucy and I were just saying how nice it is to have you back in town." Lucy hadn't said any such thing, but she didn't correct her mother in front of Thomas. She just nodded politely and looked around. "For an excuse to leave?" "Perhaps," Thomas said, stepping closer. Miss Lucy would enjoy hearing more about my studies sometime. Maybe over dinner? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire nobody wanted. Lucy felt her mother's hopeful eyes on her and saw Thomas's expectant smile. She knew what he was really asking, and she knew what her answer had to be. "That's very kind of you," she said carefully, "but I'm quite busy with the shop these days. Mother and I have so many orders to fill before winter." Thomas's smile flickered for just a moment. He wasn't used to being turned down, especially not by a seamstress from a family with no particular standing in town. "Surely you can spare one evening for Christian fellowship?" "I'm sorry, but no." Lucy's voice was gentle but firm. "I hope you understand." The silence that followed felt heavy. Other conversations around them seemed to quiet down as people sensed something interesting happening. Helen looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground. Thomas's face went through several expressions before settling on a cold smile. "Of course," he said finally. "Perhaps another time when you're less busy?" As Lucy and her mother walked home that afternoon, Helen couldn't contain herself anymore. "Lucy, what were you thinking?" "Thomas Carter is a fine young man from a good family. His father practically runs this town. That's exactly why I don't want to have dinner with him. Mama, did you see the way he looked at me? Like I was something he could just take if he wanted it badly enough." Helen sighed, adjusting her church hat against the October wind. "Sometimes, honey, we have to think practically. The shop doesn't make much money, and I'm getting older. Good marriage could secure your future. I'd rather secure my own future, thank you very much." That evening, Reverend Carter knocked on their front door. This was unusual because the Reverend typically sent messages through other church members rather than making house calls himself. Helen answered the door, immediately nervous and trying to smooth her hair. "Good evening, Mrs. Mitchell. I hope I'm not disturbing your family time." "Of course not, Reverend Carter. Please, come in." "Can I make you some tea?" Lucy appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She had been cleaning up after their simple dinner, and she wasn't pleased to see their unexpected visitor. The Reverend settled into their best chair, the one Helen usually reserved for special occasions. He looked around their modest living room, at the worn furniture, the faded curtains, the small stack of unpaid bills on the side table that Helen thought she had hidden. "I wanted to speak with you both about a wonderful opportunity," he began, his voice taking on that special tone he used for important announcements. "My son Thomas was quite taken with young Lucy today. In fact, he's asked me to speak with you about the possibility of a courtship." Helen's face lit up with surprise and hope. Lucy's face did the opposite. "Reverend Carter," Lucy said before her mother could respond, "I already told your son that I'm not interested in dinner, and I'm not interested in courtship either." The Reverend's eyebrows rose slightly. In his world, young women didn't speak so directly to men in positions of authority. "My dear girl, I think perhaps you don't understand what a blessing this would be for your family. Thomas will inherit a position of great respect in this community. You would want for nothing." "I don't want for anything now," Lucy replied, which wasn't entirely true, but she wasn't about to admit that to him. "Lucy!" her mother hissed, embarrassed by her daughter's boldness. Reverend Carter held up a hand to Helen, his eyes never leaving Lucy's face. "It's quite all right, Mrs. Mitchell. Young Lucy simply needs time to pray about this decision. Sometimes God's plan isn't immediately clear to us." "I don't need to pray about it," Lucy said firmly. "I know my own heart, and I know I don't want to marry your son. I'm sure he's a fine man, but we wouldn't suit each other at all." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Reverend Carter's kindly expression began to fade around the edges. "Lucy, dear, marriage isn't about what we think we want. It's about accepting God's plan for our lives. And sometimes that plan requires us to trust in the wisdom of those who know better." "Are you saying God told you that your son and I should marry?" Helen made a small gasping sound at her daughter's audacity. "I'm saying," the Reverend continued, his voice growing colder, "that some decisions affect more than just ourselves. Your family has always been welcome in our church community. Your mother has many friends here. Your business depends on the goodwill of your neighbors." The threat was polite but clear. Lucy felt her stomach tighten with anger and fear. "Are you saying that if I don't marry Thomas, we'll no longer be welcome in the church?" "I'm not saying anything of the sort. I'm simply pointing out that communities work best when everyone understands their place in God's design." The change started small, like a pebble thrown into still water. The ripples spread slowly at first, then faster, until everything Lucy had known about her life in Millbrook began to shift. Monday morning came with its usual routine. Lucy unlocked the shop door at 8 sharp, just like she had every day for the past 3 years. She arranged the measuring tapes and pins, sorted through the work that needed finishing, and waited for Mrs. Patterson to arrive with her husband's trousers that needed hemming, but Mrs. Patterson didn't come at 9:30. Lucy started to worry. Mrs. Patterson was always punctual, sometimes arriving even before Lucy opened the shop. By 10 o'clock, she decided to walk over to the Patterson house to make sure everything was all right. Mrs. Patterson answered her door with an embarrassed look that Lucy had never seen before. The older woman twisted her hands in her apron and wouldn't quite meet Lucy's eyes. "Oh, hello, dear," she said, her voice strangely formal. "I was just I was going to send word. Is everything all right? You were supposed to pick up Mr. Patterson's trousers this morning." "Yes, well, about that. Mrs. Patterson glanced nervously over her shoulder. "I've decided to take them to Mrs. Hartwell instead. She's opened a little alteration service out of her home, and, well, it might be more convenient for us." Lucy felt confused and a little hurt. "Did I do something wrong with the hemming? If there's a problem, I'd be happy to fix it." No, nothing like that. Your work is always beautiful. It's just, well, sometimes change is good, don't you think?" There was something in Mrs. Patterson's tone that made Lucy's stomach flutter. With worry, this wasn't about convenience or wanting a change. Something else was happening here. "Mrs. Patterson, if I've done something to upset you, you haven't upset me, dear." "Not me personally." The older woman's face softened for a moment, and she looked like she wanted to say more. Instead, she stepped back into her house. "I'm sorry, Lucy, I truly am." Walking back to the shop, Lucy tried to shake off the strange encounter. Maybe Mrs. Patterson really did just want to try someone new. Maybe she was reading too much into a simple business decision, but by Wednesday, when 3 more customers canceled their orders with flimsy excuses, Lucy knew something was definitely wrong. Helen tried to stay optimistic. "Maybe it's just a slow week, honey. You know how things go up and down." But Lucy could see the worry in her mother's eyes, especially when Helen thought she wasn't looking. They both knew their regular customers, knew their habits and their loyalty. These sudden cancellations weren't coincidence. Thursday brought the first direct confrontation. Lucy was walking to the general store to buy thread when she passed a group of women from the church gathered outside the post office. She recognized them all, Mrs. Davidson, Mrs. Chun, and Mrs. Rodriguez, women who had always been friendly before. As Lucy approached, their conversation stopped abruptly. Mrs. Davidson gave her a cold nod that was barely polite. "Good morning, ladies," Lucy said, trying to keep her voice cheerful. "Morning," Mrs. Davidson replied stiffly. The other women just looked away. Lucy continued toward the general store, but she could hear their whispers starting up again behind her. She couldn't make out the exact words, but she caught her name mixed in with phrases like ungrateful and too proud for her own good. Inside the store, Mr. Williams served her with the same coolness. He had always been chatty before, asking about her mother's health and sharing local gossip. Today, he barely looked at her as he counted out her change. "Mr. Williams," Lucy said, desperate to understand what was happening. "Have I done something to offend you?" He glanced around the store to make sure they were alone, then leaned closer. "Lucy, I like you and your mother, always have. But you need to understand that some decisions affect more than just yourself." "What decisions? I don't understand." "I think you do," he said sadly. "And I think you need to consider whether your pride is worth more than your family's well-being." Lucy left the store feeling like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. This wasn't random anymore. People weren't just avoiding her business, they were sending her a message. And she was pretty sure she knew who was behind it that evening. Thomas Carter appeared at their front door. Unlike his father's formal visit, Thomas came with a bouquet of flowers and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good evening, Mrs. Mitchell, Miss Lucy," he said, removing his hat. "I hope I'm not intruding." Helen, despite everything that had happened over the past week, still saw a handsome young man from a good family standing on her doorstep. "Of course." "Not, Thomas, please come in." Lucy stayed where she was, not inviting him further into their home. "What can we do for you, Mr. Carter?" "I wanted to apologize for any awkwardness after church on Sunday. I fear I may have been too forward in my approach." His voice was smooth, practiced. "I was hoping we might start over, perhaps take that dinner I mentioned." "I appreciate the apology," Lucy said carefully, "but my answer hasn't changed." Thomas's smile tightened slightly. "Lucy, I wonder if you've noticed how quiet things have been at your shop lately." The direct reference to their troubles made Helen gasp softly. Lucy felt anger rising in her chest. "Are you saying you have something to do with that?" "I'm not saying anything of the sort," Thomas replied, his tone innocent. "I'm simply observing that small towns can be unpredictable. Sometimes a family finds themselves welcomed and supported, and sometimes He shrugged elegantly. "Well, sometimes they don't." "Are you threatening us?" "Threatening? Lucy, I'm trying to help you. I'm offering you a solution to your problems." He stepped closer, and Lucy could smell his cologne mixed with something else, the scent of someone who had been drinking. "One dinner. One simple evening where we get to know each other better. Is that really so terrible?" Helen looked back and forth between them, clearly torn between protecting her daughter and securing their future. "Lucy, maybe you should—" "No." "Mama," Lucy's voice was firm. "Mr. Carter, I've told you politely that I'm not interested. Now I'm telling you directly, leave us alone." Thomas's mask slipped completely. His face darkened, and for a moment Lucy saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. "You're making a mistake, Lucy Mitchell." "A big mistake. The only mistake I'd be making is having dinner with you." Thomas put his hat back on, his movements sharp with anger. "Small towns have long memories, Lucy, and they don't like young women who think they're better than everyone else. After he left, Helen and Lucy had their worst fight yet." Helen begged her daughter to reconsider, pointing out that their savings were nearly gone and their customer base was disappearing fast. "What happens when we can't pay rent on the shop? What happens when we can't afford food?" Helen cried. "Is your pride worth starving for?" "It's not about pride, Mama. Can't you see what kind of man he is? Did you see how he looked at me tonight? Like I was something he could buy or take by force? Maybe he just needs to get to know you better. Maybe once you're married, he'll be kinder." Lucy stared at her mother in disbelief. "Listen to yourself. You're talking about me marrying a man hoping he'll be kinder after he owns me." The word owns hung between them like a curse. Helen looked stricken, but she didn't deny it. By Friday, Lucy's worst fears were confirmed. She sat in their empty shop all day without a single customer walking through the door. Even people who just used to browse or chat had stopped coming by. That afternoon, she decided to walk through town to see if she could understand the full scope of what was happening. What she discovered made her blood run cold. At the bakery, she overheard Mrs. Chun telling her daughter, "We don't shop where ungodly people work." At the pharmacy, she saw Mr. Peterson quickly look away and pretend to be busy when she walked past his window. But the worst moment came when she stopped by the church to pick up a donated dress that her mother was supposed to alter for the charity drive. Mrs. Foster, the church secretary, looked genuinely uncomfortable when Lucy arrived. "Oh, Lucy, dear, I'm afraid there's been a change of plans about that dress." "What kind of change?" "Well, Reverend Carter thought it might be better if we handled the alteration internally. You understand?" Lucy understood perfectly. She was being cut out of even the charity work. Walking home, she passed the church just as Sunday school was letting out. A group of teenage boys, including Thomas's younger cousin Danny, were hanging around outside. When they saw Lucy, Danny called out loudly enough for everyone to hear, "There goes the girl who thinks she's too good for a Carter." The other boys laughed, and Danny continued, "My cousin Thomas says she's been leading him on, pretending to be interested and then playing hard to get." Lucy stopped walking. "That's not true, and you know it." "Are you calling my cousin a liar?" Danny stepped closer, emboldened by his friends and his family connection. "I'm saying your cousin needs to learn that no means no." The confrontation might have escalated, but Mrs. Foster appeared and shooed the boys away. She gave Lucy a look that was part pity and part warning. "You should go home, dear, and maybe think about what's best for everyone." That evening, Lucy made a decision that terrified her but felt necessary. She walked to the Reverend's house and knocked on the front door. Reverend Carter answered, looking unsurprised to see her. "Lucy, I wondered when you might come by." October 31st came with an unusually cold wind that rattled the windows and made the old trees around Millbrook groan like they were in pain. Lucy had always loved Halloween as a child, but this year the approaching darkness felt different, more threatening, like something bad was waiting in the shadows. The past 2 weeks had been the hardest of Lucy's life. Their shop had been completely empty for days. No customers, no income, no hope of things getting better anytime soon. Helen had started taking, in washing from neighboring towns, work that paid very little but was better than nothing. Lucy tried to help by offering to clean houses or work in the fields, but word of the Carter family's disapproval had spread beyond Millbrook. Even in nearby towns, people were hesitant to hire someone who had earned the wrath of such an influential religious family. That morning, Lucy's mother sat at their small kitchen table, staring at a pile of unpaid bills. Her face looked older than it had just a month ago, with new lines around her eyes and a tiredness that sleep couldn't fix. "Lucy, honey," Helen said quietly, not looking up from the papers. "Mrs. Anderson from Pine Creek offered me a job at her boarding house. Full-time work, but I'd have to live there during the week." Lucy felt her stomach drop. "Mama, no." "We can figure something else out." "What else is there to figure out?" "We're 3 months behind on rent. Mr. Thompson has been patient, but he can't wait forever." Helen finally looked up, and Lucy saw tears in her mother's eyes. "Maybe it would be better for both of us if I took the job. At least then you could make your own decisions without worrying about me." The idea of her mother leaving, of being completely alone in this hostile town, terrified Lucy more than she wanted to admit. But she also knew Helen was right about their financial situation. "Let me think about it," Lucy said. "Maybe there's still another way." Helen nodded, but they both knew she was running out of options. That afternoon, Lucy decided to walk through town one more time. She told herself she was just getting fresh air, but really she was hoping to find some sign that things might be getting better. Maybe someone would smile at her, or nod hello, or show some small kindness that would give her hope. Instead, she found something that made her blood run cold. Outside the general store, a group of young men were gathered around Thomas Carter. Lucy recognized most of them: Danny Carter, Bobby Williams, Jake Patterson, and a few others. They were all around Thomas's age, all from families that were closely connected to the church. They were drinking from a bottle that Bobby kept hidden in a brown paper bag, passing it around and laughing louder than they should have been in the middle of town. But what made Lucy's skin crawl was the way they all looked at her when they noticed her walking by. Thomas saw her first. His eyes were bright with alcohol and something darker. Well, if it isn't Miss High and Mighty herself." The other young men turned to stare, and Lucy felt like a rabbit that had wandered into a pack of wolves. She quickened her pace, hoping to get past them without any confrontation. "Hey, Lucy," Thomas called out, his voice carrying across the street. "Don't be rude. Come say hello." Lucy pretended not to hear him and kept walking, but she could hear footsteps behind her. Her heart started beating faster. "Lucy, I'm talking to you." Thomas's voice was closer now, and definitely angry. She turned around, trying to keep her voice calm and steady. "Good afternoon, Thomas. I hope you're having a nice day." The group of young men had formed a loose circle around her, not close enough to be obviously threatening, but close enough to make her feel trapped. They all smelled like alcohol and excitement. Actually, I'm having a terrible day, Thomas said, stepping closer. Want to know why? Lucy didn't answer, but Thomas continued anyway. Because I keep hearing stories around town about this ungrateful young woman who thinks she's better than everyone else. This woman who's been leading me on for months, making me look like a fool? I never led you on, Lucy said firmly. I've been nothing but honest with you. Honest? Thomas laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. You call it honest to flirt with me at church, to smile at me, to make me believe you were interested, and then reject me in front of the whole town? Lucy stared at him in disbelief. I never flirted with you. I was just being polite, the way I'm with everyone. See, boys? Thomas turned to his friends. She's still lying. Still trying to make me look like the bad guy. Bobby Williams, emboldened by the alcohol and the group dynamic, spoke up. Maybe she needs to learn some manners, Thomas. Maybe someone needs to teach her how to treat a good Christian man with respect. The threat in his words made Lucy's mouth go dry. She looked around, hoping to see other people nearby who might help if things got worse. But the street was strangely empty for a Saturday afternoon. I think I should go home now, Lucy said, trying to sound calm. No, I don't think you should, Thomas said, grabbing her arm as she tried to walk away. I think you owe me an explanation. And an apology. His grip was tight enough to hurt, and Lucy could see that the alcohol had made him unpredictable and dangerous. Let go of me, Thomas. Not until you admit what you did. Not until you apologize for humiliating me and my family. I'm not going. To apologize for being honest about my feelings? Thomas's grip tightened, and for a moment Lucy thought he might actually hurt her right there in broad daylight. But then Jake Patterson spoke up. Thomas, man, there are people coming. We should probably ... Thomas looked around and saw Mrs. Foster walking toward them from the direction of the church. He released Lucy's arm but leaned close to her ear. This isn't over, he whispered. You've embarrassed my family for the last time. As the group dispersed, Lucy rubbed her arm where Thomas had grabbed her. She could already feel a bruise forming. Mrs. Foster approached with a concerned look. Are you all right, dear? I'm fine, Lucy said, though she was anything but fine. Just heading home. Mrs. Foster glanced after the group of young men, then back at Lucy. Maybe you should be extra careful walking around town. Especially at night. You never know who might be having too much to drink. The warning was clear, and Lucy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold October air. That evening, Helen noticed the bruise on Lucy's arm immediately. When Lucy explained what had happened, her mother's face went pale. Lucy, this has gone too far. These people aren't just trying to pressure you anymore. They're getting dangerous. I know, Mama, but what choice do I have? If I give in now, it'll just prove that they can bully anyone into doing what they want. Helen sat down heavily in her chair. Maybe ... Maybe we should leave Millbrook. Maybe we should pack up and move. Somewhere else, start over. With what money and go where? We don't have anywhere else to go. They sat in silence for a while, both of them understanding that they were trapped. They couldn't afford to leave, but staying was becoming more dangerous every day as night fell. Lucy helped her mother prepare for bed. Helen had been having trouble sleeping lately, worrying about their situation and their future. Lucy made her some chamomile tea and sat with her until she dozed off, but Lucy couldn't sleep. She sat by her bedroom window, looking out at the dark street and thinking about everything that had happened. The town that had once felt like home now felt like a prison. Every shadow could hide someone waiting to hurt her. Every sound could be the beginning of another confrontation. Around midnight she heard voices outside. Male voices trying to be quiet but not quite succeeding. Her blood turned to ice water. Peering carefully through her curtain, she could see a group of figures gathered across the street. Even in the darkness, she recognized Thomas's tall frame and the way he gestured when he talked. There were at least 4 or 5 others with him. Lucy's heart started pounding so hard she was sure they would hear it. She crept to her mother's room and gently shook her awake. Mama, she whispered. There are men outside. I think they're planning something. Helen sat up immediately, instantly alert. Are you sure? Look out your window. But be careful not to let them see you. Helen peered through her curtains and gasped softly, Oh my God, Lucy, we need to call the sheriff. The sheriff is Thomas's uncle, remember? And even if he weren't, what would we tell him? That some men are standing in the street talking? They watched for what felt like hours as the group seemed to debate something among themselves. Finally, just as Lucy was starting to hope they might leave, she saw Thomas point directly at their house. The group started moving. Mama, they're coming. We need to hide. Helen grabbed Lucy's hand and they crept to the back of the house, away from the front door. Lucy could hear footsteps on their front porch, then the sound of someone trying the door handle. When they found it locked, there was a moment of silence. Then came the knock. Lucy! Thomas's voice called out, friendly and cheerful like nothing had happened that afternoon. Lucy, we know you're in there. Open up! Lucy and her mother pressed themselves against the wall in the kitchen, hardly daring to breathe. Come on, Lucy, Thomas continued. We just want to talk. We're here to make you an offer you can't refuse. The other men laughed at this, and Lucy heard the sound of a bottle breaking against something hard. If you don't open the door, Thomas's voice had lost all pretense of friendliness now. We're going to come in anyway. And trust me, you don't want that. The men surrounded Lucy as they walked through the dark streets of Millbrook. Thomas walked beside her, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. The others, Danny, Bobby, Jake, and two more she didn't recognize well, formed a loose circle around them. Where are we going? Lucy asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Somewhere we can have a proper conversation, Thomas said. Somewhere private where you can't run away or cause another scene. Lucy's heart was beating so fast she felt dizzy. Every instinct told her to run, but she was outnumbered and they knew the town better than she did. Besides, running might just make them angrier. Thomas, whatever you think I did to you, I'm sorry. Can't we just call it even and go home? Thomas stopped walking so suddenly that Lucy almost bumped into him. Sorry? You're sorry now? He laughed, but it was an ugly sound. Where was this? Apology 2 weeks ago? Where was it when you made me look like a fool in front of the whole congregation? I never meant to embarrass you. I just couldn't marry someone I didn't love. Love? Bobby Williams spoke up from behind her. Who said anything about love? This is about respect. About knowing your place. They had reached the old stone church that sat at the center of town. Its tall tower pointed up at the cloudy sky. Like an accusing finger? Lucy had always found the church beautiful during the day, with its arched windows and carved doors. But at night, with shadows crawling across its walls, it looked more like a fortress than a place of worship. Why are we here? Lucy asked. This seems like the perfect place for you to find some religion, Thomas said, pulling a key from his pocket. My father gave me these keys when I came back from seminary. Sighed, I might need them for late-night prayer sessions. The heavy wooden door creaked open, revealing the dark interior of the church. Lucy could make out the shapes of pews and the tall pulpit where Reverend Carter delivered his sermons every Sunday. I don't want to go inside, Lucy said, backing away. Jake Patterson grabbed her arm before she could get far. Nobody asked what you wanted. They pushed her through the doorway, into the cold, musty air of the church. Thomas lit a lamp he found near the entrance, and the flickering light made their shadows dance on the walls like demons. You know what I think? Thomas said, walking closer to Lucy. I think you need to spend some time thinking about your sins, about pride and stubbornness and the way you've been treating good Christian men. Thomas, please, this is crazy. Let me go home to my mother. Your mother? Thomas laughed again. Your poor mother is probably relieved to have you out of the house for a while. Do you know how much trouble you've caused her? How many friends she's lost because of your behavior? The words hit Lucy like a physical blow because she knew there was some truth in them. Her mother had lost friends and customers because of Lucy's refusal to marry Thomas. But don't worry, Thomas continued. After tonight, everything will be different. After tonight, you'll understand your proper place in this community. Lucy looked around desperately, searching for another way out. but the men had positioned themselves between her and the door. The only other exit she could see was a narrow staircase that led up to the church tower. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, hoping that if she cooperated, they might let her go without anyone getting hurt. "First, I want you to apologize. Publicly. I want you to admit that you led me on, that you made promises you didn't keep, and that you're sorry for embarrassing me and my family." Lucy felt sick to her stomach. "Thomas, that's not true, and you know it. Are you calling me a liar?" Thomas's voice got dangerous, and the other men moved closer. Lucy looked at their faces in the lamplight. These were men she had known her whole life, men who had sat in these same pews every Sunday and listened to sermons about kindness and forgiveness. But there was nothing kind in their expressions now. "If I apologize," she said carefully, "will you let me go home?" "Maybe, if it sounds sincere enough." Lucy took a deep breath. She thought about her mother, probably sitting at home terrified and wondering what was happening. She thought about their unpaid bills and their empty shop. Maybe if she said what Thomas wanted to hear, this nightmare would be over. "I'm sorry," she began, but Thomas cut her off. "Louder, say it like you mean it." "I'm sorry that you feel I embarrassed you. I never intended—" "No." Thomas slammed his hand against the nearest pew, making Lucy jump. "That's not an apology. That's you making excuses and trying to make me look bad again." "I don't know what else you want me to say. I want you to tell the truth. I want you to admit that you're just a proud, stubborn girl who thinks she's better than everyone else in this town." Lucy felt tears stinging her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Fine, I'm proud and stubborn. I'm sorry. Can I go home now?" Thomas studied her face for a long moment. "No, I don't think you are sorry. I think you're just saying what you think I want to hear so you can go home and laugh about how you fooled us all again." "That's not true." "Then prove it." "Prove you." "Understand how much trouble you've caused by agreeing to marry me, right here, right now, in God's house." Lucy stared at him in horror. "What? You heard me." "Say yes. Say you'll marry me and all of this goes away. Your mother keeps her friends, your shop gets customers again, and everyone in town forgives and forgets." "Thomas, you can't be serious." "You can't force someone to marry you." "I'm not forcing anything. I'm offering you a choice. Say yes, and we all walk out of here happy. Say no ... He shrugged, but his eyes were cold. "Well, maybe you need more time to think about it." Before Lucy could respond, Danny Carter spoke up from near the door. "Thomas, maybe we should just leave her here overnight. Let her pray about it. Sometimes God speaks loudest in the quiet hours." Lucy felt panic rising in her throat. "You can't leave me locked up in here." "Why not?" Bobby Williams grinned. "It's not like anyone will come looking for you. Half the town thinks you're crazy anyway. My mother will call the sheriff." "The sheriff is my uncle," Danny reminded her. "And even if he wasn't, what's he going to do? We're not hurting you. We're just giving you a quiet place to think and pray." Thomas nodded slowly, like the idea was growing on him. "That's not a bad idea, cousin. Sometimes people need to spend time alone with God before they can see clearly." "No," Lucy backed away from them, moving toward the altar without thinking. "Please don't leave me here." "Then say yes," Thomas said simply. "Say you'll marry me and we'll all go home right now." Lucy looked at their faces, searching for any sign of mercy or reason, but she saw only determination and something that scared her even more. The absolute certainty that they were right and she was wrong. "I can't marry you," she whispered. "I'm sorry, but I just can't." Thomas's expression hardened. "Then I guess you need more time to reconsider." The men started moving toward the door, taking the lamp with them. Lucy realized with growing terror that they really meant to leave her here in the dark. "Wait," she called out. "What if something happens? What if there's a fire or someone breaks in?" "Nothing's going to happen," Thomas said from the doorway. "This is God's house. You'll be perfectly safe as long as you use the time to think about your sins." "How long are you going to leave me here?" "Until you're ready to be reasonable." "Could be a few hours, could be a few days, that's up to you." The heavy door swung shut with a sound like a coffin closing. Lucy heard the key turn in the lock, then the sound of footsteps fading away into the night. She was alone in the dark church, with only the faint moonlight filtering through the stained glass windows to keep her company for a few minutes. Lucy just stood there in shock. This couldn't be happening. People didn't just kidnap someone and lock them in a church in 1954. This was America. Not some medieval kingdom, but as the minutes passed and no rescue came, Lucy had to accept the horrible reality. She was trapped. And nobody knew where she was except the men who had put her here. She felt around in the darkness until she found the wall, then followed it to one of the windows. The glass was too thick to break with her bare hands, and even if she could break it, the windows were too high above the ground for her to jump safely. The front door was solid oak, locked from the outside with what sounded like a very sturdy lock. She tried pushing against it anyway, but it didn't budge. That left the tower stairs. Lucy had never been up in the church tower, but she knew it had windows that opened to let the bell ring out across the town. Maybe one of those windows was low, enough for her to call for help, or even climb out onto the roof. She felt her way carefully up the narrow stone steps, using the wall to guide her. The stairs spiraled upward in complete darkness, and more than once she stumbled on the uneven stones. Finally, she reached a small room at the top of the tower. Moonlight streamed through 4 arched openings, one facing each direction. Lucy rushed to the window that faced her house and leaned out as far as she dared. "Help!" she called out into the night. "Someone help me!" But her voice just echoed back from the empty streets. Millbrook was a small town that went to bed early, and it was now well past 2 in the morning. Even if someone heard her, they probably wouldn't be able to tell where the sound was coming from. Lucy tried calling for help from each window, hoping someone might be awake, might hear her and come to investigate. But the town remained silent and dark. Robert Hartford had been awake for 3 days straight. Sleep had become impossible since his wife Margaret died 6 months ago, and on nights like this he found himself wandering the streets of Millbrook like a ghost haunting his own life. Robert was 35, a carpenter by trade, and before Margaret's illness, he had been known as one of the most reliable men in town. He built sturdy houses, fixed broken furniture, and minded his own business, but grief had changed him, made him more observant, made him notice things that others missed or chose to ignore. Tonight was no different from the dozens of sleepless nights that had come before it. Robert pulled on his jacket and boots, grabbed his walking stick, and headed out into the cold October air. He had no destination in mind, just a need to move, to tire his body enough that maybe, just maybe, he could sleep when he got home. His route took him past the church, as it often did. The old stone building had always given him comfort, even though he hadn't attended services much since Margaret's funeral. Tonight, something felt different about the place. Wrong, somehow. As he got closer, he heard something that made his blood run cold. A voice calling for help. A woman's voice, coming from somewhere high above. Robert stopped walking and listened carefully. There it was again. "Help me! Please, someone help me!" He looked up at the church tower and saw a figure silhouetted against one of the arched windows. A young woman, leaning out and calling desperately into the empty street. Robert had lived in Millbrook his whole life, and he knew that tower had been locked for years because the stairs were considered unsafe. No one should be up there, especially not at 4 in the morning. "Hello?" he called up. "Are you hurt?" The woman's voice became stronger when she heard him. "Yes, I'm not injured, but I'm trapped up here. The door is locked from the outside." Robert moved closer to the base of the tower. Even in the dim moonlight, he could see that the heavy wooden door was indeed locked. "How did you get up there?" "Some men brought me here and locked me in. Please, you have to help me get out." Something in the woman's voice, the desperation, the exhaustion, the genuine fear, told Robert this wasn't some teenage prank or lover's quarrel. This was serious. "What's your name?" he called up. "Lucy Mitchell. Do you know my mother, Helen?" "We run the tailor shop on Main Street." Robert knew Helen Mitchell by reputation. She was a quiet, hard-working woman who had raised her daughter alone. After her husband died years ago, he also knew, because gossip traveled fast in small towns, that Lucy had been having some kind of trouble with the Carter family. Lucy, I'm Robert Hartford. I'm going to get you out of there, but I need to find the key. Do you know who locked you in? There was a pause before Lucy answered, and when she did, her voice was smaller. Thomas Carter and some of his friends. But Mr. Hartford, if you go to them for the key, they might hurt you too. Or they might just deny everything. Robert felt a familiar anger building in his chest. It was the same anger he had felt watching Reverend Carter use his position to control and manipulate people. The same anger he had felt when the Reverend had suggested that Margaret's illness was somehow God's punishment for Robert's lack of faith. Don't worry about me, Lucy. Just try to stay warm up there. I'm going to figure this out. Robert stood in the street for a moment, thinking, going to the Carter's house and demanding the key would probably result in denial and possibly violence. Going to the sheriff might work, except that Sheriff Peterson was Thomas, Carter's uncle, and had shown repeatedly that family loyalty came before justice in his book, but Robert had skills that most people didn't think about. He had been building and repairing things for 20 years. He understood how locks worked, how doors were constructed, and how to get into places that were supposed to be secure. Lucy, he called up, I'm going home to get some tools. I'll be back in 20 minutes. Can you hang on that long? I don't have much choice, came the weak reply. But please hurry. I'm so cold and I've been up here all night. Robert ran home faster than he had moved since Margaret's funeral. He grabbed his tool bag, a heavy crowbar, and a thick blanket. As an afterthought, he also took the thermos of coffee he had made earlier and some bread from his kitchen. When he got back to the church, he could see Lucy still at the window, but she wasn't calling for help anymore. She was just hunched over, trying to stay warm. Lucy, I'm back. She looked down, and even from that distance, he could see her relief. I'm going to break the lock, Robert called up. It might take a few minutes, and it's going to be loud. If anyone comes to investigate, you tell them I'm here to help you, understand? Yes, thank you, Mr. Hartford, thank you so much. Robert examined the lock carefully. It was old but solid, the kind that would take considerable force to break. He positioned his crowbar and began working at the mechanism, trying to be as quiet as possible, but knowing that some noise was unavoidable. On his fifth attempt, the lock finally gave way with a loud crack that echoed through the empty street. Robert pushed the heavy door open and stepped into the dark church. Lucy, I'm coming up. He climbed the narrow stone steps carefully, using his knowledge of old buildings to navigate the uneven surfaces. When he finally reached the top of the tower, he found Lucy huddled in a corner, shivering uncontrollably. Oh, thank God, she whispered when she saw him. I thought maybe no one would ever find me. Robert immediately wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and handed her the thermos of coffee. Here, drink this. It's still warm. Lucy's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the thermos, so Robert helped her drink the coffee. As the warmth spread through her body, she began to cry, not from sadness, but from pure relief. How long were you up here? Robert asked gently. Since around midnight. They said they would leave me here until I agreed to marry Thomas Carter. Lucy looked up at Robert with eyes that were exhausted but still defiant. But I won't do it. I won't marry someone who would do this to me. Robert felt that familiar anger again, but he kept his voice calm. You shouldn't have to marry anyone you don't want to marry. Come on, let's get you down from here and home to your mother. As they made their way carefully down the narrow stairs, Lucy told Robert what had happened. The harassment, the threats, the way the whole town had been turned against her family. By the time they reached the bottom, Robert understood that this wasn't just about a rejected marriage proposal. This was about power and control and what happened to people who dared to stand up to the wrong family. Lucy, Robert said as they stepped outside into the pre-dawn air, what those men did to you tonight was kidnapping. That's a serious crime, no matter who their father is or how much influence they have in town. But who's going to believe me? Thomas will say I broke into the church myself, or that I went willingly, or something else that makes it my fault. Robert thought about this as they walked toward Lucy's house. She was probably right about how the town would react. The Carters. had too much influence, and Lucy had been painted as a troublemaker for weeks now. What if we had proof? He asked suddenly. What kind of proof? The lock I just broke? It was definitely locked from the outside. I can tell by the way the mechanism bent when I forced it. And there might be other evidence too. They had reached Lucy's house, where Helen was waiting on the front porch in her nightgown, pacing back and forth with worry. When she saw her daughter, she ran down the steps and pulled Lucy into her arms. Lucy, oh honey, I was so scared. When those men took you away, I didn't know what to do. I was afraid to go to the sheriff, afraid they might hurt you worse if I caused trouble. It's okay, Mama. Mr. Hartford found me and got me out. Helen turned to Robert with tears streaming down her face. Thank you so much. I don't know how to repay you. You don't need to repay me, Mrs. Mitchell, but I do think we need to make sure this doesn't happen again. Over the next few hours, as Lucy warmed up and ate some food, Robert made several trips around town. He photographed the broken lock with his camera. He measured the height of the tower windows to prove that escape would have been impossible. He even found some of Lucy's clothing fibers caught on the rough stone where she had been leaning out calling for help. But more importantly, he talked to people. Quietly, carefully, he spoke with the few residents of Millbrook who had grown uncomfortable. With the Carters increasing control over the town, Mrs. Foster, the church secretary, admitted she had seen the group of young men heading toward the church that night. Mr. Williams reluctantly confirmed that his son Bobby had come home drunk and bragging about teaching someone a lesson by Sunday morning. Robert had enough evidence to take to the state police rather than the local sheriff. The state investigators took one look at the evidence and Lucy's statement and immediately began making arrests. Thomas Carter was taken into custody first, found at his father's house still sleeping off his hangover. When confronted with the physical evidence and witness statements, he quickly implicated his friends in an attempt to reduce his own charges. The trial, when it came 3 months later, was a sensation. People came from 3 counties to watch the Carter family's fall from grace. Reverend Carter, though not directly involved in the kidnapping, was forced to